One feature of the history of language teaching over the last 100 years perhaps is that ideas about how to teach a second or foreign language have often been shaped by the concept of a method. We've perhaps familiar with communicative language teaching or task-based teaching or audiolingualism or grammar translation and so on. One of the things that is common to all of these methods is that they have been developed on the assumption that the learner's primary contact with English takes place in the classroom. So the classroom is sort of seen as a self-contained universe, and the method seeks to create within the classroom ideal conditions for language learning. Now, these practices that the methods make use of course, are influenced by issues of the day, ideas of the time about how people learn and what language consists of, and so on. Now, one of the issues with methods-based teaching is that the classroom in itself is a very limited environment for the use of language, for the authentic use of language. It's also limited in terms of the amount of time that is available in the classroom for language instruction. Typically, in many countries, English language instruction may be no more than 3 or 4 hours a week. Now, this is far less time than is actually necessary to learn a language. To learn a language effectively, not only must the classroom be used as a useful resource, but learners will have to make use of resources outside of the classroom to extend the amount of learning time that is available. What has happened in recent years, I think, is that if you talk to successful learners, although they value the amount of input they get from their lessons, or at least they often do, successful language learners are not totally dependent on those. They make use of resources outside of the classroom. And these days, technology and the internet are providing far more resources that were available to learners a generation ago. A generation ago, learners in Thailand and Korea and Japan or wherever didn't have many opportunities to hear English or to have contact with English outside of the classroom. So the classroom itself tried to provide an authentic environment in which students could be exposed to language and gradually develop some of the basic communication skills needed in language use. But these days, the majority of time which students make use of for language learning is often outside of the classroom. They make use of resources on the internet, watching movies, songs, games, and so on. And they use these resources as a source of input to their own learning. And often when you talk to second language learners as to how they would account for their expertise in using English, they don't often refer to the kind of lessons that they had at school or the textbooks that they made use of at school. They refer to things that they did on their own. Maybe they looked for opportunities to look at things on the internet. They may have taken part. They may have watched movies with subtitles, for example. And these themselves are a very rich source of learning input for many language learners today. If you compare learners in countries, for example, the northern countries like Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, many young high school graduates or high school students in those countries, I've found, are quite fluent in English. And they don't attribute this fluency to the lessons that they had at school. They refer often to the fact that in their countries, movies and television programs are shown in the original language, just with subtitles added where necessary. So in other words, they're being exposed to hundreds of hours of English through the media of television and movies. There's no dubbing. Whereas if you go to countries, other parts of the world where dubbing is widely used, and Italy would be an example, for example, students are not getting this rich exposure to English. So their proficiency is often reflected that you do not find very well developed English language usage among students in countries where dubbing is a widely practiced phenomenon. So the point I'm making here is that successful language learners make use of opportunities in the community, through the media, through digital technology and other resources, to enable them to move beyond the limitations of classroom-based teaching and add hundreds of hours of contact with and use of English to their learning input. So these days, what is the role of the classroom, you might say? Well, the role of classroom learning is to really give students the resources to be able to access learning outside of the classroom. This means that they probably need a repertoire of at least 1,000 words, possibly more, to be able to start accessing authentic language use outside of the classroom. So the classroom becomes a bridge to out-of-class learning and is not an end in itself. The classroom itself, if language learning is limited to the classroom, students will typically not have developed very strong communication skills by the time they leave secondary school. And this is the case in many parts of the world, that students, if their English is solely confined to what they get at school, they will find that to go beyond that, they will have to register in private institutes, take additional courses at university, and so on. And what we find often is that they really go back to the starting point again. It's what we call the false beginner syndrome. They get to university, the first year university in Korea or Japan, and their communication skills are so weak that they really have to start learning English all over again. This is not the case in countries where students develop a better level of proficiency through school and through out-of-class exposure to English in the countries I mentioned, such as Finland, Norway, and Denmark, that students are well able now to proceed, if necessary, to English medium instruction because their English language skills have been developed through extensive contact and exposure to English outside of the classroom. And that they had through the school the language resources that they needed to be able to learn English independently from what they got in the classroom. So just to summarize again, language learning, successful language learning, if you talk to second language learners, often reflects the fact that the learners drew on whatever resources they had from school or from independent learning to be able to move into authentic contact with English through social media, through Facebook, through watching movies, through songs, games, and so on. And so develop their language learning skills that way rather than simply relying on what they made use of, what they were taught in the classroom.